Hey YouTube, thanks for watching DIY Bri. In this week's episode, I'm going to show you guys how to throw a radiator in this 99 Toyota Corolla. Alright guys, so I picked this Corolla up for 150 bucks. I was able to get it so cheap because it's got some mechanical issues with it. I plan on fixing it up and selling it for a little bit of a profit. The rear struts are blown out, it's missing the wheel cover there. It's kind of beat up in a few areas I'm going to try to fix up. Biggest issue is it's got a cracked radiator. I'm going to show you guys how to fix that there. Has some broken door handles. This outside door handle's broke. This inside door handle here is also broke. So in this episode, I'm going to show you guys how to replace the radiator on it. I'm going to take it into the shop because it's going to be a little bit easier for me to do on a hoist. But more importantly, I'm going to be able to show you guys better and have some better video with the vehicle up in the air so that you'll be able to see the process even better than doing it down on the ground. Alright guys, so the previous owner of this Toyota Corolla unknowingly cracked the top of this radiator. What he was doing is he was driving the car with it really low on antifreeze. What he didn't know was that over time it had leaked the coolant out from the top of the radiator. It actually has the seams there along the top that have been leaking. That's what that green crusty coolant stains are along the top of the radiator seam, is where this radiator's actually been leaking for some time. Eventually the radiator got low enough on coolant and started sucking in enough air that it wasn't cooling the vehicle down properly. It wasn't cooling the engine down and caused it to severely heat up, and then it actually cracked the top of the radiator. Alright guys, so we're getting ready to throw this radiator in this Corolla. This process is very similar to many of the import models and even the domestics. So whether you have a Corolla or any other car that you're replacing a radiator on, this video should have some helpful tips at getting your radiator replaced. Alright guys, so the first thing you want to do is actually raise the vehicle up. Now here at the shop I'm able to use this vehicle hoist to lift the vehicle up. At home you're going to have to do it on a jack and use your jack stands. Make sure that you get it real safe before you get underneath it. The first thing you need to do is drain the coolant out. Over to the right side will be what's called a petcock. Loosen that up and the coolant is going to start draining out. Make sure you've got a good drain bucket ready and available to put underneath the drain petcock and allow the coolant system to completely drain as much as you can out of the radiator. As you loosen the drain up, more coolant will come out of the bottom of it. One way to get the coolant to drain faster is by removing the radiator cap. Allow the coolant to drain into a bucket there. While the radiator is draining, go ahead and lower the vehicle back down. At this point, you can start removing the hose clamps to the upper radiator hose, unbolting the radiator brackets, unplugging the fans. You want to get everything from the top unplugged that you can. So you've got your fan plugs, which you have one there on the left, and you also have one over there on the right. Make sure you get both of those unplugged and then both brackets undone before you start removing the radiator. So the first thing you do, remove your cap and then grab your impact driver and start removing the radiator brackets. You take two 12mm bolts out there. You've got one there, that remove the radiator brackets. After you take both brackets off, go ahead and loosen the radiator clamp there. Loosen it up and then push the clamp back just an inch or two there and let it sit there. Grab a set of pliers and break the seal of the radiator hose like that before you try pulling it off. Otherwise, it's a lot harder to remove the radiator hose. Then you take the overflow bottle hose clamp off. Using the same set of pliers, go ahead and wiggle the clamp back, the overflow hose off the radiator. Start unplugging the fans. You can either use a flat-headed screwdriver or just use your fingers to push the clip back and pull the connectors apart. Once you get everything all unhooked, Then you raise the vehicle back up. Start by removing the lower radiator hose clamp in the same process that you did the upper. Grab your pliers, move the clamp a little bit further back a couple inches, grab the pliers and break the seal by moving the radiator hose, wiggling it back and forth until it's good and loose. Now you can start removing your lower radiator hose. At this point, don't pull the hose all the way off, otherwise you're getting a splash of coolant all over your face. Just pull the radiator hose back just a little bit to where it starts to drain a little bit without removing it. There's going to be a fair amount of coolant sitting in that radiator hose. And if I were to pop that off right away, it would splash all over me. So you just kind of loosen it up a little bit and let that coolant drain out of the system. Got to remove your transmission lines. So this is an automatic transmission. It's going to have a transmission cooler. You remove the hoses that go to the transmission cooler that's built into the radiator the same way you do your radiator hoses. Just grab a set of pliers and remove the clamps. Wiggle the hose back and forth just like you do the radiator hoses. Then go ahead and pull the hose off and have a bolt ready to put inside the hole so that the transmission fluid doesn't drain out of the transmission. Go ahead and remove the lower radiator hose. Now you've got the other transmission hose on the other side. Now you can see where somebody has actually had this apart before and they put two hose clamps on there. You want to make sure that you remove the unused hose clamp because it can actually cause it to wear through. Go ahead and loosen both transmission hose clamps up. Have your bolt ready to seal up the transmission cooler hose. Remove the hose, install your bolt to plug the transmission line. Lower the vehicle back down. Now you got to get ready to pull the radiator out. And lift the radiator up and out of the car and set it down onto the ground next to your new radiator. Verify that your new radiator is exactly the same as your old radiator so that it'll fit in with the transmission cooler and all the bolts. Then remove your lower radiator mounts off of the old radiator. They're little round mounts there, rubber insulators. Go ahead and remove those and install them onto your new radiator. They just push on a little stud there. You're going to have two of them. Remove both of them and install them on to the new radiator. Next, take your 10mm and your impact driver and loosen up all the bolts that hold the fan assembly to the radiator. Install the new fan onto your new radiator. Start by hand tightening all the 10mm bolts before you actually use your impact driver on them. Tighten up all the bolts and you're just about ready to go ahead and put the radiator into the car. Now it's time to set the new radiator into the vehicle. You do this by installing it in the same way that you removed it. Grab each end, go ahead and lower it down into the vehicle. Make sure all your hoses and stuff are out of the way so that it doesn't get caught as you're pushing it down. Now double check to make sure your lower radiator mounts are pushed in solid onto your new radiator and they're not falling off and you don't actually lose one. Slide the radiator carefully in front of the engine there. Lower it back down and get the rubber insulator lower mounts into the hole of the frame of the car. The body of the car has two holes in it that the radiator sits down in. Make sure you fit them and set it down in the hole. Now it's time to start hooking your radiator back up. Start by plugging the left fan in there with the two connectors together. Once you get the connectors together, go over to the upper radiator hose and push that onto the new radiator. Align the clamp up so that you can tighten that later. Then plug in your right side fan as well and hook up your overflow bottle hose to the little connector there. Take your radiator brackets and line those up and grab your 12mm bolts. Take your impact driver and tighten those down. Make sure you install the clamp onto the overflow hose. Then grab your impact driver and tighten your hose clamp down. Now make sure that you don't tighten the radiator hose completely with the impact driver. If you tighten it too tight with your impact driver, you can actually crack the radiator by tightening the clamp too much. Grab you a flat-headed screwdriver to check the torque to make sure you didn't over-tighten it or that you don't have it under-tightened. Make sure the radiator is sitting in there correctly and you've got all your connectors hooked up, all your hoses are hooked up. Start connecting your hoses on the bottom of the radiator. Again, you've got your lower radiator hose and your transmission lines that you need to hook up there. Now, you can see it's got an old clamp there on the lower radiator hose. You want to install a new clamp on that. Those original style clamps can actually weaken up and not have a very good seal. So I always recommend removing that style of clamp there and installing the standard worm clamp to tighten up the radiator hose. Now go ahead and push your radiator hose onto the new radiator. Now line up your new clamp and tighten it up. Remember not to over tighten the clamp. You can crack the radiator by over tightening it. Go ahead and get it snug and then grab you a screwdriver and torque it down tight. Now it's time to hook up your transmission lines. Go ahead and push them on, get them on all the way. Make sure that you always install new hose clamps for your transmission lines as well. Go ahead and tighten the transmission clamps up. Put your other line on, get it on all the way, and go ahead and tighten those clamps up as well. Alright, now it's time to fill the cooling system up with antifreeze. You want to get a 50% water, 50% antifreeze mixture and fill the system up completely with the engine off. Also fill up the overflow bottle. Then you want to be able to purge the system of all the air. You do this by grabbing a special tool, an adapter that'll hook to the top of the radiator and allow you to be able to fill the engine while the engine's running. Now this is going to help you bleed the system out. I'll put a link in the description below the video to buy one of these. Go ahead and rehook up the battery. I always disconnect the battery when doing a major repair. Now it's time to go ahead and start the engine. Once you start the engine, the water pump's going to start circulating the coolant from the radiator into the engine, sucking a lot of it in there. That will drop down. Now there's still going to be a lot of air in the system. You need to purge the system by squeezing the upper radiator hose while the engine's running. This is going to help remove some of the air in the system. There's going to be a lot of air trapped in the cooling system. You've got to get that out of there. Get those air bubbles out of the system. Sometimes, like on this particular model, it can be extra difficult to get all the air out. This will cause the heater to not work. In this case, I actually had to raise the front of the vehicle up and bleed the system with the vehicle raised up in the air in order to get the air out of the system. I had to run the engine and continue to squeeze the upper radiator hose until I could remove all the air. Alright guys, so sometimes it's really hard to get the air out of the cooling system. In this case, I was having a tough time getting the cooling system bled of all the air. There was getting air pockets trapped somewhere between the heater hoses and the actual heater core. So what was happening, even though the vehicle wasn't overheating with the air pockets in there, I wasn't getting the proper circulation, so the heater actually wasn't working. It was just blowing cold. So I had to do something a little bit different on this vehicle, and sometimes I've had to do this on different vehicles before. You may or may not have to do this. If your heater's working good, then you can skip this process. But in this particular case, I had some air trapped in the system. So what I had to do is actually unhook the heater core lines just a little bit. I'd crack them back just a little bit, not completely take them off, and then I'd run the engine and kind of rev it up, and air would come bursting out of the heater hoses. Once I got all the air out of the system, I went ahead and hooked the hoses back up. Whenever you're installing a new radiator, you always want to install it with a new radiator cap. Go ahead and rinse off any spilled antifreeze that you might have anywhere on the engine and back by the heater hoses, along the firewall, any area that has some spilled antifreeze. Now it's time to check the transmission fluid level. You do this by starting the engine and running it through all the gears. You don't need to drive it necessarily at this point, but do put it in each one of the gears: reverse, drive, low, and then all the way back into park. Do this a couple times. Because we had the transmission a little bit drained when we did the radiator, the fluid may need to be filled or adjusted. So pull the dipstick out while the engine's running and the transmission is in park. Check the transmission fluid level. You do this by inserting the dipstick into the transmission and double checking that it's between the two cross hatches there. If the transmission level is correct, now it's time to go ahead and shut the hood and go out and take it for a test drive. Make sure that the vehicle doesn't overheat and that the heater works. Alright guys, we got the radiator in the Corolla. Seems to be running great, no issues. Heat's working really good, which means we've got all the air out of the system and the car's not overheating. Temperature's running right in the middle. We're going to bring it back into the shop, just kind of clean things up, double check I don't have any leaks or anything on it. Alright guys, the car's running great with the new radiator in it. Won't be needing this anymore. Off to the metal bin with the other ones. Alright guys, thanks for watching DIY Bri. Got the radiator replaced on this Corolla here. It's been working perfect. Been driving it a couple weeks. Getting ready to do a few more repairs for it. I've got a little bit of a list of stuff that I want to do before I sell it. I'm going to make some videos on those. I'm also going to make a video that'll help you guys buy a car like this for 150 bucks, fix it up a little bit, and sell it. So I'm going to show you the process of how I'm going to do that, and a little bit of before and after, and see what kind of money that can be made on a project like this. So make sure you stay tuned for the rest of the videos. I have new videos every Saturday. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, and if you have any questions or comments, make sure you comment those below. Any special links that I may have pertaining to the video, I put those below the video, so make sure you check out that as well. Follow me on Facebook, and keep tuning in to the DIY Bri Shows You How video series.